David's study. No one knowing the hour and day of return. No one knowing the hour and day of return. You know what? You're right about that. It's very simple. Nobody knows the hour. No one knows the days. No one knows the time. But however, what I'm saying is I'm not insisting that the return will be on Passover. I'm saying it will be in Passover in type, if you will. Because every one of these days, Passover, the two high days in unleavened, Pentecost, or Shavuot, if you will, the Feast of Tabernacles, Atonement, all of them, they point to Yahshua's return in some way or another, in some form or fashion. And every one of these need to be thought of as piece in a puzzle because every one of these has their own unique piece to that puzzle. And today we're going to discuss this unique piece brought on by Passover. As a quick review of what we just said in the study, we got the scriptures down. No one knows the day or the hour. That's in Acts 1, verses 6 and 7. We read Matthew 24:36. That's also Mark 13:32. Now we are told how he will return. We do know how he will come back. Not when, but how. Because if you will, let's open up with Acts chapter 1, verse 9. Let's start there. Acts chapter 1. We'll read verses 9 through 11. The disciples were just got to ask through asking him about about him bringing the kingdom back to Israel. He's back up in verse 6. He says, "Well, Master, now will you at this time restore the kingdom of Israel?" Verse 7. He says, "It is not for you to know the times or seasons by which the Father has put in his own authority. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witness to me through Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and throughout all the earth." Starting in verse 9. Now, when he had spoken these things, while they watched, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And they looked steadfastly toward the heavens as he went up. Two men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, "Well, you men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Yahshua, who was taken up from you into heaven, will also come in like manner, just as you saw him go up to heaven." So it answers the question and brings one up. It tells them how did they go? How they saw how he's going to return. It just said the two messengers just told them he's going to come back in the same manner in which they saw him go up. But what exactly did they see? Well, and the scriptures actually tell us how this is going to happen. And we're not going to see this typical thing portrayed in the movies about hippie Jesus, folding up his hands like this and his eyes glazing over. He just floats up kind of like, looking like he's stoned or something. No, we're not going to see that. Let us turn. Got a few scriptures. Can we try Deuteronomy 33, please? Deuteronomy 33, we're going to pick it up in verse 26. We're going to read verses 26 and 27. There is no one like the mighty one of Yeshurun, who rides the heavens to help you, and his excellency on the clouds. So he's going to come back riding on these clouds. And the eternal one is your refuge. And underneath, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will thrust out the enemy from before you and say, destroy. So again, just to touch on something we read about in David's study, it is the wicked who will be removed and destroyed. Righteous will not be taken away. As we go through this, we're going to see these clouds are actually quite symbolic. Let's go forward, please, to Psalm 68. Now, I'm not claiming I got all of them. I'm sure I may have missed one or two, or a couple, but let's try Psalm 68. Psalm 68, verse 4. Sing to Elohim, sing praises to his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds. By his name, Yah, and you shall rejoice before him. Here he is. He's riding in on his clouds. No, it's the pattern. He's riding on these clouds. Let's try fast forwarding a little bit to Psalm 104, please. Psalm 104, and we'll start in verse 3. Actually, I want to pick it up in verse 1. Let's read the first 3 or 4 verses here. O Yahweh my Elohim, you are very great. You are clothed in honor and dignity, honor and majesty. And who cover yourself with light as with a garment. You stretch out the heavens like a curtain. Verse 3. He lays the beams of his upper chambers in the waters, who makes the clouds his chariot. And he walks on the wings of the winds, who makes his angel spirits and his ministers a flame of fire. Okay, so now we got an interpretation of what these clouds are. They're his chariots. And tell me, how are chariots driven? We got a 308 Hemi in it, right? No? I didn't think so. I never saw a chariot that had a Hemi engine in it. No, but they're pulled by donkeys or oxen, right? No. No, donkeys and horses are too slow. Donkeys are too stubborn. And oxen, well, they're big and they're powerful, but they're too slow. How about horses? As someone said over here, I believe it was Johnny. Horses. They're big enough, they're athletic enough, and they're fast. And they can go whatever speed you want them or need them to. You can make them speed up and slow down. Sometimes they can run so fast you gotta rein them in, right? Okay, so we got this Joshua coming back with horses and chariots, because it says the clouds are interpreted as, or interpretation for his chariots, and they're pulled by horses. Anyone else have any thoughts or ideas about this? Well, there is one, and I failed to write it down. Did I hear somebody? No, I guess not. So he's driven back on horses. He's coming back with a cloud. Back with the clouds. So he's coming back with his holy army. And they too will be on these chariots. It's going to be a great cavalry charge, if you will. Nothing like we've ever seen. prepared for war, yes. A conquering king. You're correct, David. He's prepared for war. It's at this time when he comes back. He's not coming in peace like he did last time. He's not coming back as a little baby to call the righteous. To call the sick to healing. He's not coming. He's not coming back to call the unrighteous to repentance. He's coming back prepared for war, a conquering king. And he will return for the righteous this time. Gather and pick up his righteous. Any question or comment from anyone so far? And of course, let's try Revelation 19:11. Let's try Revelation 19. Well, here, before we go to Revelation, let's go to Habakkuk, please. I think I looked right over that one. And if I can find Habakkuk, because my pages are sticking together, Habakkuk 3, let's pick it up, verse 8. O Yahweh, were you displeased with the rivers, as was your anger against the rivers? Again, this is symbolic. As was your wrath against the sea, that you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation. Let's try, now let's jump forward to Revelation 19. Revelation 19. We're going to start in verse 11. It's about the Messiah coming back on a white horse. Now I saw heaven open up, and behold, a white horse. He who sat upon him was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and he makes war. It's like David pointed out. He's coming back for war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that nobody knew except himself. So if anyone tells you they know what that name is, they're wrong too, just like they would be on the date and time and the hour. They don't know what it is. It says plainly, it says name written that no one knew but himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood. His name was called the Word of Yahweh. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. So we're seeing a cavalry charge like we've never seen. And now out of his mouth comes a sharp two-edged sword, or comes a sharp sword, that he should strike the nations, that he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He treads them with the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of Yahweh El Shaddai. And he has on his robe and on his side the name written, King of Kings and the Master of Masters. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of the heaven, come and gather together for the supper of the great Elohim, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, and the flesh of the mighty men, the flesh of horses, and all those who sit upon them, and the flesh of all the people, both free and slave, both small and great. So you mean we're going to have people riding out to meet this army, but not to greet them, but to thinking they can fight them? It's what it looks like, doesn't it? And I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat upon the horse and against his army. I don't like those odds a bit for them. Then the beast was captured, with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived all those who received the mark of the beast and worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone, and the rest were killed with a sword that proceeded from the mouth of him that sat upon the white horse, and the birds were filled with their flesh. Well, the birds of the air had a great feast, doing the cleanup duty of all those that were slain, or that will be slain. So we know how he is going to return. He's going to return riding a white horse, with an army riding on white horses, and they will be armed to the teeth, and he'll have a sword in his mouth, kind of like the one in Hebrews 4:12, that two-edged sword, right? Now, so we know how. We still don't know when. Scriptures are plain. We don't know when, but we know how he will return, and we know what the apostles saw. They saw him go back up on his big white horse, and this impressive entourage that came with him, that rode up with him. It said, remember, the angel told him, the messengers told them while they were looking up into heaven, he would come back in the same manner, right? So that's what they saw. Anyone have any question or comment up to this point? Usual, just get your hand up. I'll call on you. Yes, Larry.
Well, I'm thinking of the very first time Yeshua made a public appearance as the Messiah was when he was in the temple in Luke, the 4th chapter, and he opened up and read the scriptures in Isaiah, the 61st chapter. And there he said in verse 18, where he was handed the book of the prophet of Isaiah, it says, "And the Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the glad tidings to the poor, and he has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year." And he stopped. This was in the middle of the second verse of Isaiah 61. He stopped there, because that was the purpose he was there then.
Mm-hmm.
But in Isaiah, the last part of verse 2 says, "And of vengeance of Elohim to comfort all that mourn." So in verse 2 it says, "To proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh and the day of vengeance of Elohim to comfort all that mourn." So he didn't say in his first public appearance as the Messiah that he was bringing wrath and vengeance upon them. He was there for a different purpose. But that same purpose about the vengeance would be future.
That's right. Because all that would be proclaimed, and the day of vengeance would be proclaimed at a future time. He was sent as the proverbial doctor to heal the sick. He will return as the conquering king. So, what's this got to do with Passover? Well, let's just start in Exodus 12. Let's just read a few verses out of Exodus 12, and we'll go forward from there. And then we'll go forward from there, and we'll see just how this puzzle, look, this piece of the puzzle looks, and how it will start to take shape. Because we got the first part of how it's taking shape already. He's coming back on that white horse. Exodus 12, verse 1. Now Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, and let's drop down to verse 12. For tonight, for I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, being the 14th, Passover. I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the mighty ones of Egypt I will execute judgment, because I am Yahweh. Let's try verse 23. Drop down to verse 23, please. For Yahweh will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel, on the two doorposts, Yahweh will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you. It's talking about being stricken. I mean, it didn't happen in the movie. Like, what's that movie where this green slime? The Ten Commandments. Thank you. That's what. Yeah. At midnight, this green slime, kind of misty slime, kind of crawls through the streets of Cairo, and it kills off. You got people going, yeah, just acting like they're choking. And they drop dead. No. He says he will strike them. But how's he going to strike them? I know. How about with that sword he's carrying? Imagine that. I mean, he's going to strike them with that sword he's carrying. Verse 29. And it came to pass at midnight that Yahweh struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to all the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, for all the firstborn and all the firstborn of all the livestock. Pharaoh rose in the middle of the night, and the servants and all the Egyptians. There was a great cry in the land of Egypt, for there was not a house in which there was not one dead. So this killing of the Egyptians and those who did not have the blood on their doorpost, it wasn't a quiet thing, was it? It was quite the calamity. Woke everybody up. So if we had this green slime, like in the movies, flowing through the streets, that seems like a rather quiet thing. But on the other hand, if we have, say he and a few fellas on white horses carrying swords, striking people down, that's going to cause a little bit of calamity, isn't it? Now, how would this or something like it play out in the future? Well, we got a couple of occurrences in Scripture, and here's what we're going to do. We're just on something similar. We're going to go through Scripture, through a few Scriptures, and see that just how this might all tie in. Let us try Joshua 6, please. Because this actually did happen during the time of unleavened breads, actually. Not on Passover per se, but close enough. Because we have to remember something about types. Can anyone remember one of the key elements about types? David, I know you know this one, so you got to wait, okay? They are, one of the things about types we need to remember is they are inherently imperfect. As good as they are, some are, yes, some are better than others. Some may strike us as a bit of a weak type, or could the type be weak, or is the weakness in our understanding? It could be the weaknesses in our understanding, isn't it? But even if there was some cases of some types being better than others, you're right. That just proves some are better than others and more complete than others. That's right. A type cannot be an exact copy. Never have been, never will be. They're not right now. Why is that, David? Spoil it for everybody.
It wouldn't be a type.
Thank you. I love it when a man remembers that. Yes. It wouldn't be a type. That is correct. It would be the fulfillment, the ultimate fulfillment, if you will. Good. David gets a cookie. Oh, he's happy. Okay. Now, with that, let's go to... Anyone else before we go to Joshua 6? Okay, this is on the eve of the destruction of Jericho. And back up Actually, if we back up to verse 5 momentarily. That what they had done is they had the second generation circumcised, and they were on the eve of keeping their first Passover. Imagine that. They were about to cross. They had just crossed over the Jordan. Because now here, let's go to Joshua 5. Let's start out. Let's go to verse 9. Then Yahweh said to Joshua, "This day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. The name of this place is called Gilgal to this day." Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate the produce of the land on the day after Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. And the manna ceased after they had eaten the produce of the land. And the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. So this was undoubtedly, if they're eating this produce of the land, what had they just done? They not only just kept the Passover, but they'd done what? How about the way the first fruits? They were able to keep the first fruits. In any case, let's go on to the destruction of Jericho. So Joshua and the children of Israel have just had Passover. And Joshua 6, verse 1. Now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. No one went out and no one came in. Can I have a fan on, please? It's getting a little stuffy up here. Thank you. And Yahweh said unto Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hands, its king and the mighty men of valor. And you will march around the city. All of you men of war will go around the city once. You will do this for 6 days." 6 days. 7 priests shall bear the trumpets of the ram's horns before the ark, and the 7th day you will march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. It's a great, talk about a way to keep unleavens. It shall come to pass, they'll make a long blast with the ram's horn. When you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and then the wall of the city will fall down flat. And the people shall go up, every man straight before him. So if we're talking about the men of war, he's talking about those of Israel, the men of Israel who are or at least 20 years old. And Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of the ram's horn before the ark of Yahweh. Proceed and march around the city, and let him who is armed advance before the ark of Yahweh." So they do this for their 6 days, just like they're told. And let's drop down to verse 15. So up to verse 15, they're doing this every day. Now verse 15 says, "They come to pass on the 7th day that they rose early, about the dawning of the day, and they marched around the city 7 times in the same manner." And on that day, they only marched around the city 7 times. And on the 7th time it happened, when the priests blew their trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout for Yahweh has given you the city. And now the city shall be doomed by Yahweh to destroy." He said, not by us. He said, by Yahweh. Remember, it was Yahweh who passed the judgment. Yahweh, and Joshua is saying it's been doomed by Yahweh to destruction. "It and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, and she and all who are in her household, because she hid the messengers that we sent." So we got this. Now, no one here is exactly on a horse. I don't recall them having any horses during this march out of Egypt, but all the men were armed. They even had priests who were armed and guarding the ark, as they carried it around and blowing trumpets. Don't we see kind of this symbolism here? Joshua being in type Joshua, fulfilling the type of Joshua in the future, what he's doing here. And he's got this great army with him. Minus the horses, of course, but still. And now you, by all means, verse 18, abstain from the accursed things, lest you become accursed when you take off the accursed things and make the camp of Israel accursed and trouble it. But all the silver and the gold and all the vessels of the bronze and iron are consecrated unto Yahweh, and they shall become into the treasury of Yahweh. So when the people shouted, when the priests blew their trumpets, and then it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. And the people went up to the city, and every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword. So they're all they're armed somehow with swords. But Joshua had said to the two men who had spied out the country, go into the harlot's house, and from there bring out the woman and all that she has, just as you swore to her. And the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all that she had. So they brought out all of her relatives and left them outside the camp of Israel. But they burned the city and all that was in it with fire. And only the silver and the gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put to the treasury of Yahweh. And Joshua spared Rahab the harlot, her father's household, and all that she had. So she dwells in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers of whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. And Joshua charged them at that time, saying, cursed be the man before Yahweh who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay its foundation with his firstborn, and with his youngest he will set up its gates. So Yahweh was with Joshua, and his fame spread out throughout all the country. Well, after an event like that, I imagine they would be scared of Joshua about now. If I were ruler of any other cities of these Canaanites, yeah, I think I'd be scared too. I'd be wanting to do something to make peace with him like somebody else did. They lied. That's another story. Said they were from a faraway country. Well, this happens during if we back up to verse 5, this was all happened within the days of unleavened. That's a way to keep unleavened. Conquering a city that Yahweh had given unto you. Let's try Daniel 2, please. Now we're turning to Daniel. If anybody can think of an example from Scripture, kind of like the one we just read, and how it might play out, get your hand up. I'll call on you. I'd like to hear what you got to say. But in the meanwhile, we're going to turn to Daniel 2. It's all about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And he has this dream about this image of the four different metals. It's got gold, let's just pick it up in verse Verse 29. This is where Daniel interprets the dream. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while you were on your bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who revealed the secrets has made it known to you what will be. But as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who makes known the interpretation to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You were watching, O king, and behold, a great image. This image was splendid, was excellent, stood before you, was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold. Its chest and arms were of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet of iron and partly clay. So it's got a composite of material from head to toe of how all this is made up. And Daniel further explains what this means. And you watched while a stone was cut, verse 34, while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. And the iron and clay and the bronze and the silver and the gold were all crushed together and became like chaff before the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no trace of them could be found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now this is a dream, and we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. Because you, king, are a king of kings. For the power of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory, and whatever the children of the men dwell, or whatever beasts of the field, of the birds and of heaven, he has given them into your hand. And he has made you ruler over them. You are the head of gold. And after this, about other kings coming and inferior kings coming, because after all, we know silver is not as good. It's inferior to gold and bronze and all as we go down. And the rocket strikes it. What destroys all the kingdoms? Strikes it at the foot and destroys all the entirety of the image. Just like I said, where none of it was found. It was all like chaff. Where it all blew away, no one can find a trace of it. Anyone have any question or comment? Because this didn't exactly happen on Passover, but it did have the same effect, just like Joshua 6 and Exodus, though, did it? Because remember, what happened on the night of the Passover, especially later on, just a week later, just a few days later, when the Egyptian army was destroyed at the Red Sea. Egypt pretty much ceased being a major power in the world. The largest, biggest, baddest, most powerful nation on the earth was destroyed. It was just a shadow of its former self. Jericho, right at the close of unleavened, was destroyed. Now, we don't have a time image given here, but the pattern fits, doesn't it? Can anyone else think of a ruler or a kingdom that was destroyed in a similar manner? Let's try Acts 12, shall we? Let's just see what we can glean from that. This time we're talking about a fellow named Herod. I think we've all heard of this guy. Not a very nice man, as I understand. Because in the first 4 verses, we read of Herod's violence to the church. Let's just read about that a little bit. Now, about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. He comes from a long line of Herods. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now this was during the days of unleavened bread, or days of unleavened. It says plainly right here, now it was during the days of unleavened. So when he arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover. Just kind of hold him up and we'll take care of him after Passover. Now, let's just see what happens next here. Because the story with Herod's not over yet. Remember, this is during unleavened here. Now, Peter was kept in prison, but constant prayer was offered to Yahweh for him by the church. Now, when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and the guards before the door to keep him in prison. Now, behold, an angel of Yahweh stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. He struck Peter on the side, raised him up, saying, "Arise quickly." And the chains fell off his hands. Then the angel said to him, "Now gird yourself and tie on your sandals." And so he did. Now he said, "Now put on your garment and follow me." So he went out and followed him, and did not know that it was being done by, and did not know what was done by the angel was real. But he thought he was seeing a vision. He thought he was just, remember, he had woke up from sleep. He thought he was dreaming. He thought it was all a dream. When Peter had come to himself, he realized, "Now I know for certain that Yahweh has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod, and from all expectation of the Jewish people." And now when he had considered this, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark. There were many gathered together praying. As Peter knocked at the door, the gate, a girl named Rhonda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her gladness, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter stood before the gate. She was so happy and excited she didn't even think to open the door. She just ran in and told everybody. "He's here! He's here!" Well, okay, did you let him in? Oh, I guess not. And they said, "You're beside yourself." But she kept insisting it was so. So they said, "It is his angel, or it's his ghost." Now Peter continued knocking. "Hello, let me in." And when they opened the door and they saw him, they were astonished. But motioning to them with his hand to keep silent, he declared to them how Yahweh had brought him out of the prison. He said, "Now go tell these things to James and to the brethren." And they all departed, and they went to another place. As soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers about what had become of Peter. But when Herod had searched for him and not found him, he examined the guards and commanded them that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea, and he stayed there. Now here's something interesting happening to King Herod. Now Herod had become very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, but they came to him with one accord, having made Blastus the king's personal aide their friend, and they asked for peace because their country was supplied with food by the king's country. Now on a set day, Herod, arrayed in royal purple, sat down on his throne and gave an oration to them. So he's all gussied up in his finest his royal outfits. Gives them an oration. And the people kept saying, "Oh, the voice of a man, the voice of a God, not of a man. Oh, it must be so, the voice of a God, not of a man." And immediately the angel of Yahweh struck him. And because he did not give glory to Yahweh, and he was eaten by worms, and he died. Remember, he didn't die right away by being struck. This time, Yahweh let him linger and live a little bit and die in his agony, being eaten by worms. He didn't strike him with a sword and cut his head off. He struck him with evidently a disease of some kind and became infested with worms. Yes, Larry.
worm infestations of the groin.
Okay.
And it was a very slow, excruciating death.
Yes, that had to be, yes. Anyone else? Again, not exactly on Passover, but the main events that led up there did happen during unleavened bread. Now, can we bounce backward one more time? 'Cause I think I seem to have overlooked one. Let's try. Actually, it was one I wanted to wrap this all up with. Let's go back to 2 Chronicles, please. We're going to go to chapter 29. This is the account of King Hezekiah. Because the account of Hezekiah is actually one of my favorite accounts in all of Scripture. Because he portrays a mighty type of Joshua. And I think we'll see as we go through this. 2 Chronicles 29, verse 1. Now Hezekiah became king when he was 25 years old, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah. And he did what was right in the sight of Yahweh, according to all that his father David had done. Now in the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors to the house of Yahweh, and he repaired them. And he brought in the priests and the Levites and brought them to the east square, and he said, "Now hear me, Levites. Now sanctify yourselves. Sanctify the house of Yahweh, Elohim of your fathers, and carry out the rubbish from this holy place." So he orders all the trash that had been... Remember, the temple had been out of use for quite some time. It needed to be cleaned out, and it needed to be repaired. Now, how would this, in any way, shape, or fashion, point to Joshua? Anybody? How about Joshua driving out the spiritual trash from the temple? When people were selling the animals. And he critiqued the crowds, saying, my father's house will be known as a house of prayer, but you've turned it to a den of thieves. He turned over all the tables of the money changers, drove the animals out. He wasn't exactly using a sword, but I think he used what we would today call a bullwhip. Let's continue on in 2 Chronicles, please. Pick it up in verse 6. For our fathers have trespassed and done evil in the eyes of Yahweh, our Elohim. They have forsaken him. They have turned their faces away from the dwelling place of Yahweh and turned their faces back on him. They have also shut up the doors of the vestibule and put out the lamps. They have not burned the incense or offered burnt offerings in the holy places to the mighty one of Israel. Therefore, the wrath of Yahweh fell upon Judah and Jerusalem, and he has given them up to trouble, to desolation, to jeering, as you see with your eyes. For indeed, because of this, our fathers have fallen by the sword. Our sons and our daughters and our wives are now in captivity. So we have already had one wave of people taken into captivity at this time. Now it isn't in my heart to make a covenant with Yahweh Al Shaddai of Israel, that his fierce wrath may turn away from us. My sons, don't be negligent now. For Yahweh has chosen you to stand before him and to serve him, that you should minister him and burn his incense. So he's restoring the proper worship of Yahweh. We got any lessons or stories or accounts of anything about Joshua restoring the proper worship of Yahweh? Wasn't that one of the more vital lessons he taught to the woman in Samaria? That the Father, not just to her, but to us today even, that the Father is seeking those who worship him in spirit and in truth. So picking up from verse 20 and going on to the rest of the chapter, it gives greater detail about Hezekiah restoring the worship of the temple once all the trash had been hauled out, the doors and gates had been repaired, and all this. Now, let's see what chapter 30 might say. It's about Hezekiah keeping the Passover. So all this up to this point had been in preparation. And now, it's showtime. It's time for, what time is it in the account here? Passover. So after all the preparation being made, we are now seeing Passover. And Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah, verse 1 of chapter 30, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh that they should come to the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem to keep the Passover of Yahweh, Yahweh of Israel. For the king and his leaders all kept the assembly in Jerusalem and had agreed to keep the Passover in the second month. For they could not keep it at the regular time, because a sufficient number of the priests had not consecrated themselves, nor had the people gathered together at Jerusalem. Well, I thought the second Passover was if you were traveling or had become unclean or ill, and Yahweh left it as an act of mercy, left it a way for us to still keep Passover, but in the second month. What would this have to do with anything? Yes, David.
They were healed.
You mean, are you saying spiritual uncleanness instead of physical uncleanness?
Yes.
David, you know what? You're right about that. That's exactly it. Because they were still traveling. In a matter of speaking, even the travel. Why would travel have anything to do? Well, one thing, if they're coming down from Ephraim and Manasseh, that's got a good way to go in terms of physical. But nonetheless, they were still on that spiritual journey. The people were just now starting to turn to Yahweh. People were just now starting to turn to Yahweh shortly after the king's declaration. And they were still on that spiritual journey. They were traveling spiritually. And it was the second month before they could all keep the Passover. So, in a matter of speaking, I believe that would apply, don't y'all? I think so. Verse 4, and the matter pleased the king and all the people. And they resolved to make a proclamation throughout all of Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, that they should all keep the Passover. Remember, these people are just now turning back to Yahweh. They're on that journey out from following the other beings that they had been worshiping. That they should keep the Passover unto Yahweh of Israel at Jerusalem, since they had not done it for a long time in the prescribed manner. So it had been years. Then the runners went through all of Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his leaders, and spoke through the command of the king. Children of Israel, returned to Yahweh Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Israel. And he will return to the remnant of you who have escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. But do not be like your fathers and your brethren, who have trespassed against Yahweh Elohim of their fathers, so that he gave them up to desolation, as you now see. And don't be stiff-necked as your fathers were, but yield yourselves unto Yahweh, and enter his sanctuary, which he has sanctified forever. And serve Yahweh your Elohim, that the fierceness of his wrath may turn away from you. As we go through the story, we're seeing a clearer type of Hezekiah as of being Joshua, as a type of Joshua, don't we? And the story goes on. Let's just see how far they take this. Let's fast forward to verse 13, please. Now many people, a very great assembly, gathered together at Jerusalem to keep the feast of unleavened in the second month. Question: they're keeping unleavened in the second month. How is this in of itself a type of anything future that Joshua will do? Because when he comes back, where's it all going to start? It's going to start when he calls his first assemblies together. According to Zechariah 14, that's going to be the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, it just goes to show we never know the day and time of this coming, doesn't it? It goes to show that both festivals have a unique piece in his return, doesn't it? Yes, Robert.
Remember earlier when we mentioned it says, nor the season.
Nor the season.
Nor the season.
So, in one account, we're reading a type of Passover, in another account, we're going to read the feast. So, Robert, are you saying that could be one of the reasons why we don't know?
Yeah.
Well, exactly. You know what? You're right. In verse 14, and they took away all the altars that were in Jerusalem. They took away all the incense altars and cast them in the brook of Kidron. That is, instead of just throwing the stuff into the temple as a junkyard, they now throw it in the brook of Kidron. That's the new junkyard now. And they slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th down the second month. And the priests and the Levites were ashamed and sanctified themselves and brought burnt offerings unto the house of Yahweh. They stood in place according to their custom, according to the law of Moses, the man of Elohim. The priest sprinkled blood over and received from the hand of the Levites. There were many in the assembly who had not sanctified themselves. Therefore, the Levites had charge of the slaughter of the Passover lambs for everyone who was not clean, to sanctify them before Yahweh. So even the priests were still on this journey themselves. The multitude of the people, many from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, had not cleansed themselves, but they ate the Passover contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, may the good Yahweh provide atonement for... What? Provide atonement? Provide atonement for everyone who prepares his heart to seek Yahweh. Their actions were not perfect, but their hearts were good. Is that what we're getting out of this? But may Yahweh provide atonement for everyone who prepares his heart to seek Yahweh Elohim of his fathers, that he is not cleansed according to the purification of the sanctuary. And Yahweh listened to Hezekiah, and he healed the people. Their actions, the way they carried this all out, was short of the law, was quite a bit short of it is written. But their hearts were good. Their hearts were trying to return to Yahweh. And Yahweh was inclined to accept it. So the children of Israel who were present at Jerusalem kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with great gladness. And the Levites and the priests praised Yahweh day by day, singing unto Yahweh, accompanied by loud instruments. And it goes on to discuss some of the offerings that were made, particularly the offerings offered up by Hezekiah. Verse 25, and the whole assembly of Judah rejoiced, and the priests and all the Levites and all the assembly that came from Israel, the sojourners who came from the land of Israel, those who dwelt in Judah. there was a great joy in Jerusalem since the time of Solomon. Here's what's interesting about this. So there was a great joy in Jerusalem, for since the time of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, had there been nothing like this in Jerusalem. They never had a Passover like this one. Since the time of Solomon. That's a few generations back. Then the king and the priests, the Levites rose and blessed all the people. And their voice was heard. And their prayer came up to his holy dwelling place and unto heaven. Just like Yahweh promised unto Solomon. Yahweh keeping his promise. In chapter 31, he talks about how Yahweh continues his other, how Hezekiah continues his other reforms concerning the priesthood. And then chapter 32, we come up against another nasty little fella. This time a nasty little, not so little, but nasty little man known as Sennacherib. He's leading the Assyrian army, and he's conquering all of Israel, and anything else in his way, and then he comes up on Jerusalem, and he starts cussing, defiling anything and everything he can think of as holy. Verse 10, chapter 30. Thus says Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. Oh, and what do you trust that you remained under siege in Jerusalem? Doesn't Hezekiah persuade you to give yourselves over to die by famine and by thirst, saying, Oh, Yahweh, our Elohim will deliver us from the hand of the king of Assyria? Has not the same Hezekiah taken away the high places on his altars and commanded Judah, Jerusalem, saying, You shall worship before one altar and burn incense before it? Do you not know what I and my fathers have done to all the peoples of the other lands? The gods of the nations, of whose lands in any way are able to deliver their hands out of my hand. Who there was amongst of all the gods of those nations that my fathers utterly destroyed, and could deliver his people from my hand, that your Elohim should be able to deliver you from my hand? Do not let Hezekiah deceive you or persuade you like this, and don't listen to him. For no mighty one of any nation was able to deliver his people from my hand by the hand of my fathers. Now, how much less will yours deliver yours from my hand? And from there, it goes from bad to worse. As in chapter remaining, in Chronicles 32, we see the death and defeat of Sennacherib. We read of Hezekiah's prayer unto Yahweh. Now, verse 20. Now, because of this, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz, praised and cried out unto heaven. And Yahweh sent an angel, cut down every man of valor, leader, captain in the camp of the king of Assyria. Well, Sennacherib got his question answered. Yahweh sent out an angel, kills all his army. So he returns shamefaced to his own land. When he had gone to the temple of his God, some of his own offspring struck him down with a sword there. Now, this may not have been exactly at Passover, but it's undoubtedly following the Passover of Hezekiah. Like I said, these types are inherently imperfect, but they do all have the same effect. They all have the same effect as the ones we read about in Joshua 6 and Exodus 12, which did occur on Passover. And there's still a tie in the Passover on all this. Now we're about out of time here, but if anyone has any question or comment they'd like to make at this time. Now, I'm not even claiming that we're having here. We discussed all there was to Passover and the coming of Messiah. But I hope we did get a good look at this one particular piece of the puzzle. Remember, we're talking about one piece of the puzzle and its unique place in the puzzle. And every one of the rest of these days has their place too. And with that, we'll close. Oh, okay, before we close, David's got his hand up.
Did you announce when we will be observing Passover this year?
No, you didn't.
Passover will be on the night of, thank you, yes, for reminding me, David. Passover will be on the night of April 22nd, 21st. Yes, excuse me, 21st. We'll be on the night of April 21st, after sunset.
We will be de-leavening the building Sunday the 14th. And so between, let's just say 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, however long it takes us, we ask that everybody would join in that are local to help us de-leaven the building April 14th. That's Sunday.
Okay, yes, thank you for, that Sunday, April the 14th, we will be de-leavening the building, around 10 o'clock or so, did you say? 10, okay. We'll have people, this is just for those of us who are local, but yes. Show up around, sometime up and down 10 or so, and we'll be leaving the building for Passover on April the 14th. And with that, we'll close. We'll have a closing song by Tino Netters. And we will be back this time next week. And we will have, is it Robert? Up with the study? No? Larry. Okay, Larry will pick up in most likely Matthew 25.